Hello, Gijs.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Don't go too far away from me because they won't see you.
Okay.
Maybe you can introduce yourself.
Yeah. Well, I'm Gijs Hesselink. I've been working here at this department, IQ Healthcare, since 2009. And I started here as a PhD student and performed a study on the hospital to primary care transitions of patients. Performed a lot of qualitative research, and this PhD study was embedded in a large European Union funded project in which 6 countries participated, researchers from 6 countries, and we did a multinational qualitative study on this subject. And I have a background in public administration. I started here in Nijmegen as a...
That's a different domain.
Yeah, definitely. And I always had the interest, affinity with healthcare and organizational questions and issues related to healthcare. So that's why I chose to do an extra study in health sciences, and constantly also using qualitative research.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, all the students have read your study.
Mm-hmm.
And you know they compared it to another study which was more a mixed methods study.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wondered, what were the challenges in conducting this study at the time? To me, it looks very complicated with such a multi-center study.
Yeah, it was. Well, for me, although I did some qualitative research during my master studies. For me, the principles of qualitative research were not that clear. All the major principles of conducting good qualitative research were not that clear from the start.
Yes.
For instance, we aimed at, that was formulated in the grant at that time, for, well, I don't know the exact number, but a lot of patients to be interviewed, to include, yes, and to interview, and also their care providers and caregivers. But we in qualitative research it's not that important to have a certain fixed number, and data saturation is leading, and that's something that I discovered along the way.
Yes.
Along with my other team members and colleagues.
Yes.
And what it made more complicated is that it was conducted in different countries with different cultural habits. Different healthcare systems, different regulations, and also different languages that we had to deal with during the analysis.
Yes, it must have been a huge challenge. I read it to find codes on the basis of consensus.
Yeah. What was very important was that we, first of all, we had 2 experts in the field of qualitative research who acted as a sort of quality auditors, and also guided us through this project, and they found it very important that we had a lot of face-to-face contact.
Yes.
So there a lot of time and effort was put into making each other comfortable in contacting each other and discussing codes that we developed along the way. And what we did is, we interviewed in our mother tongue language, the native language, and we transcribed the audio files in, for instance, in our case, Dutch language. Yes. But we agreed in the beginning that we would code in English. In order to have a similar way of formulating the codes. Thinking, yes. And what also was very important, that for each code we provided a definition. So we all agreed upon the definition and the meaning of the codes.
Okay.
And it led to the development of a sort of a code book after a couple of interviews that we discussed together. And that formed a sort of a standardized tool
to analyze.
Yeah, and to perform the further coding process, and also with the agreement that if we would find a new code or we came up with new findings, that we introduced it to the
Yes.
others. We discussed about it, and then we
Yes.
added to the code book.
Mhm.
We deleted other codes if we thought that this is not that necessary or not that
Yes.
relevant,
You
etc.
adjust it. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So a lot of researchers, and we experience that here often, so don't see qualitative research as results as strong evidence. It's they consider it as being soft, and does do you feel as a qualitative researcher completely taken seriously by your colleagues, or do you have to defend yourself sometimes?
I think we are taking seriously as qualitative researchers, and more seriously
Okay.
over time now, because it's more common to do so in the medical domain, the scientific domain. However, I also experienced while submitting and getting back articles or
Yes.
manuscripts from scientific journals that they often also come up with remarks that are more
Positivistic, from a
yeah,
positivistic.
don't you come up
yes.
with frequencies, and
Yes.
this is such a small number, and
Yes.
what does it say? And so
Yes.
sometimes that's something that we have to deal with, and
Yeah.
it's also very important then to explain to
Yes, them.
others the thought behind it.
Yes.
So we don't strive for how do you say it? Well, we don't have the intention to come up
Convince
with
them, or-
general or with conclusions that say, well, this is what happens in
Yes.
whole Europe with
Yes.
regard to patient transitions.
Mhm.
This is representative for each hospital how patient transitions
Mhm.
occur. But given to the principles of qualitative research that we
Mhm.
performed proposal sampling,
Yes.
we performed, we did it in an iterative way, so data collection and analysis is intertwined, and
Yes.
what you find during in between analysis, you take that with you in the new upcoming interviews in order
Yes.
to reach data saturation. These aspects are very important in order to come up with valuable, valid, and
Meaningful
information.
And it was
Yeah.
multi-centered, so
And it was multi-centered. Yeah.
that made it also more easy to generalize.
Yeah, definitely.
The
However,
students in the United States who saw your study, they complained that the problem apparently in Europe is the same as it is in the US.
oh, okay, yeah.
So that
Yeah.
was nice.
Yeah, and often I think qualitative research is a very important way and a good way to start research in a field that's not that is relatively undiscovered, and you
Yes.
can use the findings of qualitative research um, in exploring how these things occur on a more larger
Yes.
scale via survey or other
Yes.
forms of
That brings me to my next question. You know, the Grayson, the author Grayson, the article you saw also, he used a questionnaire, actually exploring the same kind of data
Yeah.
as you explored. Why didn't you choose a questionnaire?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, it's a bit. Well, the grant was already there, so I
Okay,
did not have.
You were forced to.
Yeah, I did not have that much of an influence. However, I also thought that it was very good to only do this study with qualitative research, because we wanted to know more in depth for
Yes.
a limited number of patient cases, what patients experienced, what perceptions were of related care providers
Yes.
and caregivers, in terms of what hindered them or helped them in the transition from hospital to home. And so it was a really an in-depth study.
In-depth. And
How-
you say so when you use a questionnaire, the questionnaire doesn't allow you to really explore in depth
Well, you don't get the lived experiences, and you don't get the whole context that sometimes is needed to better understand what patients have to deal with, or care providers related to, for instance, handovers or patient transitions.
So could it be, I hypothesized, you know, I asked myself this question, and I thought maybe Gijs contributed to the development of such a questionnaire.
Yeah, that could be. Well, I think this is a good example, at least my study, and other qualitative studies as well, to get more insight in the story behind the data.
Yes.
And with quantitative research, for instance, using surveys, questionnaires like Grayson did at all. Well, it's a sort of a trade-off. They were able to come up with findings that are more representative for patient transitions across the United States.
Yes.
And well, we could say our findings are more relevant in order to better understand what patients experience, and we try to do that by describing their lived experiences. We provide a sort of a narrative more. And I think it's not the good and the bad, it's both, and therefore I am also a supporter for mixed method studies. So I always hope that we were able to perform a survey based on our findings, which you also mentioned. However, it did not came so far, but
practical limitations.
Yeah.
Okay. When it became clear to all the students who read your article that you use grounded theory, and the compared study, the qualitative part of this mixed method study of Grayson, he used a kind of content analysis, but didn't specify which method actually he used, like grounded theory or phenomenology. So they saw that, well, he doesn't use grounded theory, then it will be phenomenology.
Okay.
Now, I thought, what is the difference actually? Because it's not really clear to me. Can you explain it?
Well, I think it's also, for me, it's also difficult. I'm not an expert in phenomenology actually, but what I know from previous studies that in grounded theory, you strive for the development of a hypothesis based on the data that you collect and analyze, and you try to construct a theory based on a hypothesis, and you try to relate the different themes that emerge from the data and categories below the themes, in order to better understand, for instance, why continuity of care has breakdowns with regard to patient transitions. And in our study, for instance, we related it to the differences between the hospital and primary care providers knowing each other, the relationship between them, and another aspect was that care providers often mentioned in the interviews that providing care was most important. They identified themselves as a care provider and not so much as a person who had to fulfill the administrative tasks, and that often caused for a delay of sending over the hospital.
So you try to really explain the data by doing this.
Yeah,
these relations.
Yeah, we found several themes that related to each other based on the rough data that we found. It was built on quotations from the interviewees, and in phenomenology, I think you strive more for a description of the lived experiences of those you interview.
Oh, that's what they call thick description.
Yeah,
it's not aimed at explaining it and developing a theory.
I believe that you stop with describing what people experience, also trying to relate how one thinks and how that enacts their behavior, how what people think directs their
Yes.
attitude or their actions or interactions, and that results into teams.
Yes.
But major difference is that phenomenology
It's
stops
a
there.
difficult word for me too.
Yeah. And whereas grounded theory, it doesn't stop there. You try to correlate to relate them to each other.
Okay,
And
so
come up
the
with theory.
analysis process is it's much more deep.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, this having said, did you really explain the phenomenon?
The phenomenon
Of the discharge phenomenon. Do you think you really explained it, or did you?
well, the research question was what hinders or what,
Yes.
in different articles
Mhm.
we describe what hinders or
Mhm.
facilitates
Yes.
optimal discharge.
Yes.
Well, as far as I'm able to tell about it is that I think we described those factors,
Yes.
however, based on those people we interviewed.
Yes.
And we did that purposefully.
Mhm.
So we tried to find those people who could tell us as much as possible from different angles, different views. For instance, we talked with medical specialists in surgery, but also in internal medicine, often
Okay.
known as having different attitudes, different professional.
Okay.
way.
You really collected different views on.
Senior,
Yes.
junior doctors,
Yes.
doctors working in an academic hospital
So the
versus
whole chain, actually.
all those possible factors that could have an influence on how they perceive or experience hospital
Yes.
discharge. We try to collect them and interview them in order to provide a comprehensive view of experience barriers and facilitators. And what was very important for us is to be able to say, well, now we reach data saturation. And I
Yes.
think that's a core principle for every
For-
kind of qualitative
for- yeah.
research. Inductive qualitative
Yes,
research.
inductive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're coming next week to some other kinds of qualitative research, which in saturation might not be
Okay.
something, not a quality indicator.
Mhm.
But coming to your stakeholders in the discharge process, so that you involved all stakeholders. You told us, yes, so patients, everybody. This study actually was aiming finally to improve this
Mhm.
discharge process, I suppose.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
What did happen since
Oh.
2012? Do you know that?
After the
Yes.
project completed.
Yes.
Well, that's something that bothers me a bit.
Yes.
We identified a lot of factors,
Yes.
barriers and facilitators actually. We were not able to translate it into an intervention or a bundle that we tested in daily practice.
That would have been a logical next time.
Definitely,
Yes.
yeah. And at the same time, it would be also quite logic to test our findings in a survey or
Yes.
other form of quantitative research on a larger scale in order to
Yes.
test the representativeness.
Yes. And
So,
generalizability of the results.
Yeah, that's something due to budget, etc.
Yes.
We were not able to do. That's
It's
still
a
some-
waste, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, we have this inventory of a lot of good and bad factors
Yes.
related to patient transitions. But then the next step is more important,
Yes.
perhaps.
Yes.
We better understand what causes the problems of discontinuity of care, organizationally, culturally, etc. But the next step is to improve care,
Yes.
and that's something that we
Yes.
were not able to do yet. However, I'm working now also at the emergency department, and I'm quite a supporter of one of the interventions that's quite cheap and easy to implement, relatively easy to implement. It's called Teachback, and
Yeah.
what we also heard from the interviews from patients, but also care providers, saying that, well, we instruct patients, but it often happens in between other activities with
Yes.
a lot of medical technical language. Patients often
Don't
don't
understand.
really understand.
No.
And then they go to their homes or nursing homes, but then the information is often not saved that well in their minds.